Hey guys, Ted Bogert. It is Heroes Always Welcome time. Always love this show. Love giving back to our veteran community and spotlighting them. With me, as always, is my co-host with the most, Enrique Acosta Gonzalez. And our featured guest, our special guest today, is an incredibly talented man. I didn't know until recently you were a vet, John. The one and only John Chin. That's probably because I stalked his social media for some tips on investing, and I saw that you are a veteran, so I immediately wanted you to be on this show. This show is all about spotlighting vets and talking about transitioning out of military service back into civilian service and so the difficulties that go along with that, and maybe giving our vets some tools and tricks to do that. So welcome, gentlemen. How are you all today?
Doing well.
Doing great. Looking forward to this.
Me too. Me too. So before we get into John, Enrique, of course, I'd love for them to know a little bit about you for those people who might have been living under a rock for the last 6 to 8 months we've been doing the show.
Well, thank you, Ted. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this great episode where we're featuring John. A little bit about me, Enrique Acosta Gonzalez, 26-year Navy vet and owner and of Triad Leadership Solutions. And that's about it. Let's get to John.
That's the least you've talked. I not that I like it, but I'm
getting shorter and shorter.
All right, and then I'd love to welcome John Chin to the show. John and I know each other through the crazy real estate world that we both love. I think we're masochists sometimes when we're in our industry, but John has a great story, and I'm super excited to have him on the show. Welcome, John.
Hey, glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit about you. Talk a little bit about your service, and maybe let's begin to talk about how you transitioned out and what that looked like.
Yeah, so interesting. My background, 5-year Air Force veteran, enlisted ranks. And actually, I went in because I was going to join the Army because, you know, the recruiting offices are all right next to each other in Panama City, Florida, where I graduated high school. Grew up in Maryland, but I finished high school there. And I was about to sign on the dotted line with the Army. Air Force recruiter, I told them, I can't sign with you because you don't tell me what job I'm going to get before I get the basic training. They put you in one of 4 general buckets, and then you kind of find out. So I'm like, well, I don't want to be surprised at basic training that I'm going to be a cook for the rest of, you know, my Air Force career. So why don't you tell me what job I'm going to do? And they said, well, there's only one job you can do that we can tell you up front, and that's computer programming, but you have to pass a test for that. So they sent me to processing. I didn't know that it was an IQ test until like 15 years later. I think they teach the recruiters not to tell you that for some reason. So I passed it. There was like 4 types of algorithmic type questions on it. And the 4th one I didn't know how to do. It was like the 4th type of question was math problems, like 2 trains going 100 miles an hour, different directions, you know, those kind of problems. And I just said, okay, I'm going to skip 25% of those questions. And then it's at the end, I'm just going to answer B for all of them. And I had 5 minutes left on the test. I didn't answer 25% of those questions. I answered B, and I got like 80% on this thing. So they made me a computer programmer, and they put me next to New Orleans in Biloxi, Mississippi, where my tech school was. I didn't know that computer programming was the 2nd hardest tech school in the Air Force, and we had Navy officers in my class for enlisted tech school. It was weird. Wow. So it was a hard school. But I also, you got to remember, this is 95. Like, everybody was on dial-up modem. If you were even online, most people didn't have email addresses.
Oh, yeah.
If you know anything about top producer in the real estate business, like our autoresponder was not by email. It was you licking an envelope on day 3 and someone would print out. And then you have to. So anyway, so computers were new to me at that time. I flunked out of computer programming because New Orleans, the drinking age was the last state to go to 21. So it was 18 when I was there. And needless to say, I just spent too much time partying, and it was already a hard tech school as it was. So they made me and 2 other flunkies crew chiefs on the KC-135s, which meant, you know, I was working on the aero refuelers, and I didn't like it. So the dissatisfaction I had with the job I liked the people. I just didn't like being out on the ramp when the wind was cutting through your bones in, you know, the Midwest and Kansas, McConnell Air Force Base, where I was stationed. And I was like, oh, I need to work inside. I'm an AC guy. So I got my real estate license and wanted to learn investing at the same time. And I started accidentally selling houses. The first house I sold was to an investor. And ever since then, I started working with investment property. So if you've ever been to my trainings, you know my origin story. And it started with me trying to take the Carlton Sheets No Money Down course, not understanding the language on it, and then getting a license to understand the definitions, and then me accidentally selling houses. One of the first houses I sold was to an investor. Ever since then, I've only worked with investors.
It's to me there. I have lots of questions, but Enrique, go ahead first, because I know you've always got the question. He's prepared, and then I talk too much.
No, it's interesting. So you was at Keesler then, if you was in Biloxi.
That's
Air
right,
Force.
Keesler Air Force Base.
I spent a good quite a while on Keesler, so I'm well acquainted with that. But what you brought up was so interesting. Number one, the way we make tests, right? What a way to pass a test. he broke right through all the algorithms of whatever test making skills they had. But the point that you made about not liking your job, because there's a lot of service members that are in that position. They don't like their jobs, and they're afraid to even go past just not liking it. But you went and you took a chance on this real estate. So when you was thinking that, other than just not liking your job, were you thinking a little further, like, hey, I might make a good career out of this?
Yeah, so it was really, I didn't want to sell real estate. I took the real estate course so I could learn real estate words. Because remember, I graduated high school with a 1.8 GPA. You can't graduate high school without a 2.0 GPA, but because I transitioned from Maryland schools, which had less periods than Florida schools, they gave me like a buy on that 0.2 on the GPA. Because I grew up just smoking pot on the beach in Panama City, Florida. Because when you leave your social circles that you grew up with in elementary and middle school and then high school, and you go to the South, which is a completely different, it was a social, like a culture shock to me. I was basically an extension of Alabama in the panhandle of Florida, right, in Georgia. So I go from like being in a school where interracial couples was the norm to all the black people sitting in the back of the cafeteria, and then all the white people sitting in the rest of the cafeteria, and then me being one of like 2 or 3 Asians in the whole school. So, you know, and everybody had their cliques. So the people that were accepting were the potheads. And so they were inclusive. So I'm hanging out with all the potheads, and I just, you know, I went from like an AB student in Maryland to, I've had straight F report cards. And then the second quarter, I would hightail it so I can get past the semester, and half of them I would fail, but I had enough credit. So the bottom line is I was not going to go the academic route after high school. So I had to go this route. And then when I joined the military, what I liked about it, which I said in my post, was, you know, for somebody who had a really low self-esteem, and you ever hear the expression, you never judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree. Well, I felt like I was judged based on my academic prowess, and I was a loser. And by that definition, so I carried that with me after high school. So I took a 0 on my public speaking as a junior. Funny enough, like I didn't want to public speak because I was too afraid of it. And so to graduate for your 3rd English credit as a junior, you had to do public speaking. I took a 0 because I was too embarrassed to do a 5-minute speech in front of my English class. So I had to go to summer school to make up that 3rd credit, because you need all 4 English credits to graduate high school. And then joined the military. I didn't want to sell houses. I did it because as a byproduct of taking the real estate practice course, so that I can learn the definitions to do the No Money Down program. And then it's just by accident that I started selling houses, because like my NCOs and people in my squadron needed their house sold, and they knew me. So they said, why don't you sell my house? And that's kind of how that started.
Where did the interest in Carlton Sheets come from? I always like an origin story on that. Did you stumble upon it? We're talking about basic bare minimum internet days, like you said. How did you stumble? Did somebody say, hey, you should check this out, John?
Come on, Ted, you're old enough to remember infomercials.
I do.
Personal Power 2 and Tony Robbins came on at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was broke and I was up at that time. And then Carlton Sheets came on at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I bought his course off of an infomercial. Full intention was to get it, copy all of the tapes, because there were tape cassettes, big old package of tape. I was going to copy all the tape cassettes and then send it back in my 30-day, no money back, you know, no risk guarantee. But then I ended up keeping it. And whoops, sorry.
You're good.
Can you see me still?
Yep, we can see.
Okay.
You're good.
So My screen just changed. Hold on. Let me, for some reason, everything.
Take your time.
I had another window open up, and it keeps opening up for some reason.
Infomercials were the big deal back then. All you youngins,
oh yeah,
that. That's where we all got our information from, and we called that line, and it was try this for free for 30 days. And
30 days.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. So anyway, I didn't end up returning it, but it changed the trajectory. And then the military helped me with a lot of small wins. So, during tech school, I started doing well on my tests when I was not as a computer programmer, obviously, but as a crew chief tech school. That was a different tech school. Maintenance squadron tech school was different than comm squadron tech school. So in maintenance squadron, I was slaying my tests, and I started getting some small wins. I became a student leader in tech school sorry guys, there's a tab that keeps showing up on my computer, and it keeps pushing.
We see you and hear you.
Okay, so I'll keep talking through it. So all of these, joined the drill team when I was in the military. I loved the drill team.
Oh, nice.
Student leader. So I started kind of accumulating some wins, and I was like, okay, so then that kind of expands what you believe you're capable of. And while most of the guys around me were just kind of doing their own jobs, I started looking at things that I could do, whether it was signing up for college, which I did enroll in college, but then I sold some houses, and I was like, oh, screw this college thing. These commissions are nice. So I disenrolled in college, but I started looking for other things to do because my belief in myself got bigger, and then I started to pursue bigger and better things.
Isn't that amazing how
those
couple of wins just begin to build? And I think that not just military, but anybody who comes from a low self-esteem, low self-confidence perspective, if they get a couple of those wins, it really can change the way they begin to look at themselves. And then it creates more opportunities for more wins. And I think that's a message that I love. And I hope that people hear that today, because
the environment.
Go ahead, Enrique.
Yeah, the environment as well, because he came from the beach. Now he's in this, squadron, and it's a community of high performers, right? That everybody is taking from each other, and they're building and building. So it's nice to see that he fell in the right environment, right? He became a rope, right? If he's on a drill team.
Yeah. I was a rope. I was a yellow rope, and I would have been a red rope in tech school had it not been for my short tech school, because they only gave the red ropes to F-16 crew chiefs. So we're there for like 8 months. I was only there for 4. So I love to drill and march and flip rifles. And so I was 8 up. I was actually put in for a package to get on the Andrews Air Force Base drill team, which is the national.
Look at that. Oh, wow. Yeah.
But it was funny. I had acne, and you need to send photos in, and you're a model for the Air Force to be on the drill team. Yeah. So because of my acne, they said, we can't take you. And that completely deflated me. And I was like, okay, I'm going to find something else to do. That's when I went to, I started looking for other things. That's why I got my license and everything. But what also helped too was I started finding instruction manuals for life and self-development books. I was just, for some reason, gotten itching me to go to the library on base. I was just walking past my dorms. Library was right there. I go to the library, and I find this self-development book, the first one I ever read, because up until now, I was not into self-development. But you felt something inside of you that wanted more, right? And thought there was more out there. And you don't even know about these instruction manuals for life when it comes to like written goals and, just different ways to be. So I picked up the book by Charles J. Givens called Super Self, and I just totally ate it up. First time I ever heard about written goals. He talked about like never keeping your gas under a quarter tank, because you never know, like teeny little things that maybe your dad would teach you, which I didn't really have a father figure in my house, because my mom was separated a lot and divorced, and my biological father wasn't in my life at the time really that much. I wasn't really raised with a father figure in my life. So I was kind of latched on to people like that. And for the first time, I found that in self-development books. And I was like, oh, this is a game changer. And so then came, of course, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, and then a lot more eclectic type stuff, marketing, leadership, everything. And so I ate it all up. And then from that point on, it's like, hey, once you're in the sales environment too, when you have to eat what you kill, and you don't just get to eat whether you kill or not, which is I find the public sector is you have the least performing people, in my opinion, because they're not accountable to eating what they kill. You get in the private sector where you have to eat what you kill, and you're especially in sales and or production or marketing, then everything you do is quantifiable. You can measure it and you know if you're doing a good job or not. You can hide stuff like you have no idea. I can't speak for the Navy. I can only speak for my organizations that I've been at. And I did a little stint with the National Guard for the state of Kansas on the other side of the ramp with the B-1 bombers for a little bit after I got out. But I can tell you, working in the public sector, there was so much waste and inefficiency. To this day, I have a hard problem with money going to the DOD because they can't spend the money they already have. And in the Air Force, which Enrique, you know, we were more flush than the other branches. So I'm seeing a change of command, a new colonel coming in. Because they got a new colonel coming in, they got to replace perfectly good tables and chairs just to look good for a change of command ceremony. And everybody's time being wasted to be at a stand. Like, there's so much bullshit and bureaucracy in the military, in my opinion. I was just like, man, this just gets in the way of the mission. Like, mission comes first, and you forget that in some organizations because everything gets so political. And I couldn't stand that as somebody who's just common sense. Like, let's get results. And so I love that in sales, that I don't care who you knew or what experience you had or what degree you had. I can outperform you because I'm going to work harder than you are.
Right.
And so that's why I loved about sales. And I always stayed and ever since I've just been in production.
What do you think? A lot of salespeople, John, struggle with the goals, the written goals, the analytics side. Can you give, and I think that's in any kind of job where that you should have that. Can you give them some tips on, you obviously read, you're well read, you got a lot of the self development books, but what can you tell somebody who's struggling right now? And, you know, in our industry, our particular industry, real estate, there's a lot of quote unquote salespeople who are struggling. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they have no structure, no foundation, no written goals, none of that. So can you give them a couple of tips on something or a place that they might be able to start? And especially our veterans. We have a lot of veterans who are in the real estate world. And a lot of them come to me after these shows and say, I'm struggling. Maybe I need to go back to what I was trained for in the military. I mean, it's been an interesting conversation. So any tips?
You know what's funny? That reminds, I got two answers, right? And people aren't going to like them. But one answer is, one thing that comes to mind is I remember being in the dorms with some of my buddies who they were just like, whatever the minimum that you could possibly do to not get kicked out or yelled at or be in front of your first shirt, they would do. Fast forward, we're 37, 38 years old, and they're calling me as E8s and E9s. So if you go to, but they were the first ones I would talk to about real estate. Hey, come on, get your license, man. Join me. I wanted, my friends to do it with me. And they were just happy going to the clubs and doing the same old stuff, which I did too, but I grew out of it and I started getting ambitious. They wanted to keep doing the same stuff. So I found that if you go to John Maxwell's, and this is my beef with the military, by the way, and the organizations, I don't know if you'd agree with this, Enrique, but I'd be curious to see your thoughts. But if you go to John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, his law of respect talks about if you are a 10 in leadership or a 9 or 10, you can recognize, identify, attract, and keep 9s and 10s around you as a leader. If you're a 5 in leadership, then you can only keep 2s and 3s around you.
Right.
I found that in the enlisted ranks, at least in my organizations, the people that I was surrounded by were 2s and 3s and 4s because my NCOs were 5s. And then what ends up happening is your 9s and 10s don't stick around to be led by 5s. They get out. So we're getting out. And then who you leave behind? You leave the 2s and 3s who become the E8s and E9s in the future that are now turning off the 9s and 10s that are coming in behind them. And you have this perpetuating leadership downward spiral. And that's what I saw. I think the top performing people are in the private sector, never working for the governments because they have to eat what they kill. And you can't just stick around like lemons in the school district teachers that are horrible. You can hide in an A school. You know what I mean? That's why, like, for example, Lake Nona High School and some of the better grade schools can hide the worst teachers because the parents are involved. And so that's just the beef I had. You can hear my voice, but coming back to the veteran who is maybe trying to transition, I found that a lot of the veterans were institutionalized because they never had to make, there was so many things, because we had to be so mission focused that the organizations had to keep us mission focused so that we wouldn't have to do a lot of domestic stuff and stuff that we have to absorb in the private sector, right?
Right.
So, which is necessary. But then when you get out, man, that's why there's so much transition help for people coming out, because you're kind of institutionalized and you never had to be out on your own, making your own way. You're lucky if maybe you made some connections in the private sector that came in and picked you up, so you had something waiting for you when you got out. But there's a lot of people who have jobs that aren't applicable in the public world unless you're, for example, in tactical training and you know how to use a weapon or something, right? But there's a lot of jobs that don't transfer. So
right.
They're kind of out on their own. Yep. Coming back to your question, sorry, long answer to your question. I'd say number one is you're fully responsible for where you are. Like, you can't blame shit on anybody else. I don't care what resource you had or didn't have. You just got to first acknowledge that nobody's going to come and save you, and you're personally responsible for it. So that said, you then have to get out of your own way. And in the same way that I'm not a billionaire and don't make billionaire choices and decisions consistently, a drug addict or somebody who's not on one of those extremes has to know how to get out of their own way. And there's a book by I think he could be the most important person walking the planet, Dr. Joe Dispenza. He has a lot of books, but one of his books that I like the most is How to Break the Habit of Being Yourself. And you would think that we're liberated enough to be able to make our own decisions, but we're really not, because 95% of what we think and do today is the same feelings and thoughts we had yesterday, and the same thoughts and feelings we'll have tomorrow, because our personalities and in this hormonal chemical bag that drives our feelings thinks for us. And so we can't think different. So if you want, and this doesn't matter if you're an addict, like I deal with a lot of alcoholism and addicts in my family growing up. So that trauma and those addictions, there's only two ways you get outside of getting in your own way. One of them is meditating, because you got to have metacognition. You got to see yourself being yourself and recognize patterns, right? And what's on your motherboard and your programming. Until you're aware of it, you aren't liberated to make different decisions. You can't. It's impossible, right? So you have to get out of your own way, number one. And then be able to sideline or circumvent your personality. That's one. Number two way to do it, and you see it with vets with PTSD now, is psychedelics. I'm a big fan of psychedelics as therapies. So if you look at all the vets who are at the end of their ropes and strung out on meds from the VA and have nowhere to go because it's just maintenance, and they're playing this loop in their heads, and they're suicidal, but you hear about them going to the Amazon or doing a DMT session or ayahuasca session, or now NYU and Johns Hopkins is researching psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms. And you're seeing people end these loops instantly, like one session, just boom. And they're off their meds. They're not drinking alcohol anymore. I think that those are two ways: meditation as a practice consistently, and potentially psychedelics as a therapy. I'm not talking like getting high and going to a Grateful Dead concert, but like as a therapy. I think there are two ways to get out of your personality, so you're liberated to even have the potential to make a different decision. Otherwise, you're just going to keep practicing your personality and what was on your motherboard, your programming, and you'll never get out of your own way.
Now, John, you mentioned something very, very important that has to translate to military transition. We are institutionalized. That is the core to the beginning of your whole trajectory as a military person. They have to do that because it's no longer you, it's a mission, right? And so they have to kind of like funnel you that way. But the thing that I find most hard for the military to help that person out is that they don't de-institutionalize you. They just say, have at it, good luck. And so you early on, you identified yourself as a person that was, maybe not immediately, but an 8-9, and you couldn't hang around this thing no more. You just have bigger things to do. And it reminds me of a lot of the structure. It's made that way for a reason in the military, because you have to follow orders, right? So
Sure.
if you had a bunch of 8-9s, nobody'd be like, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah,
but
and, you know, it's interesting, Enrique. There was a couple person. It was funny. I just commented on one because I saw him on my Facebook page. Bill Galvin. He was my direct supervisor, and there was a Brett Bartlett. I'll say their names. I hope they find this because they were two influential people that had a positive influence on me. I'd say they were 9s and 10s. It's not to say that you can't be a 9 or 10 in that system. It's just they were rare to find, man. And Brett Bartlett, he walked the talk. He had super high standards. Uniform was always top notch. He was learning other people's jobs. He was a jet mechanic, so the jet engine mechanic, but he knew how to crew chief and do electrical work and hydraulic work better than some hydraulic and crew chiefs could. So he was really good he was mission focused, but he was a leader and he walked the talk. And there was like two, had they been my direct supervisors or in my chain of command, because they weren't, they were like parallel. I probably would have stayed in. I remember calling Brett Bartlett. I had to find his phone number and track him down. He's in Wisconsin. And I called him up and I said, hey man, you probably don't remember me from Adam. And he didn't even remember me. But I was like, I just wanted to share the influence you had on me when I was a young man. I get emotional even thinking about this. And just the role model he played for me. He paused on the phone, like he got choked up. He was like, oh, I don't remember you. I remember the organization. We were in, Lightning Squadron or whatever at the time. He says, but he said, it's funny. I get hard on myself because people criticize me for being too hard in the private sector. Like, all crew chiefs, we went to work for Lear, Raytheon, Boeing, Cessna, all that stuff in Wichita, Kansas. So we all had these, airplane mechanic jobs waiting for us. But he went off and, worked in the private sector in that industry and aero repair and so forth. And he says that in the private sector, he gets blasted for being the way he was in the military. And I was like, no, you just keep doing you because you're a positive influence on everybody. He got choked up.
Wow.
And I meant it. And then Bill Galvin, I just commented on his post recently because I saw a veteran post for him. And he was the one who got me out of getting tickets online from the security police, would always pull me over and give me tickets. I was a troublemaker. And I loathed military police. But they were just doing their jobs. And I've spent time in the first sergeant's office with Bill Galvin standing next to me at attention because I was the one getting into trouble. And he told me afterwards, he said, dude, you guys stop being a follower and hanging out with these losers you're hanging out with. And, that stuck with me. But, military was great for me because of those role models and those influences and the wins that I had. But, for people coming out of the military right now, I would say they're dealing with the same stuff that, somebody who just lost their job is dealing with. I mean, you really have to shift, or someone who just got a divorce and the single moms out there trying to now start over financially. And now she's on her own and she never had to deal with finances before. Now she got to produce for her kids that she's got probably custody of over the guy. Right. Maybe she's not getting child support or help. Well, I'd say the same thing to that person as I would somebody transitioning out of the military is, look, no one's coming to save you. You take personal responsibility for where you're at right now, and it's up to you. And probably the best skill you can learn, because sales is a catch-all for everybody. In my opinion, I love sales. Yes. So sales can be a catch-all for everybody, but you got to learn how to talk to people, and you got to learn how to sell, and you got to build your confidence. And so self-help, I think, meditating, getting past your personality, and so you can be liberated to be different and grow as opposed to being stuck in your personality. That's number one. And then number two, just self-development, starting with sales and marketing.
Every time I hear you speak, I learn something new. I'm always so motivated. I mean that from the heart. It's inspiring when you share. I think it's important you share from your heart and you get choked up and you show it, because there's a lot of people holding all that stuff in and they're not letting any of it out. And so that can be detrimental, hugely detrimental in mindset. All right, we are at the end of our time. So Enrique, tell them the best way that they can find out more about you and how to reach you.
All right. So thank you. Triad Leadership Solutions. We just changed our site, but you can still go to triadleadershipsolutions.com or go to triadleadershipsolutions.my.canva.site. I know it's a little tricky, but we'll have it in the comments.
Fantastic. And John, again, thank you for sharing what you did. I know it's going to resonate with people. I say that from the heart. All right. What's the best way they can find out more about you?
Easiest way is we're going through a rebranding. So investoragent.com. Investoragent.com is going to be where we move all of the current stuff that we do over to that brand.
Perfect. All right. Thank you both so much. And thank you for your service. I mean that. And we'll be back. If you all want to reach out to Enrique and John, they're equally as wonderful in person as they are on this show. And I encourage you to do so. Thank you both so much from the bottom of my heart. We'll be back next time with Heroes